I call to order the City Council Standing Committee Audit and Fiscal Sustainability meeting for Monday, May 12th, 2025. I'll read the land acknowledgement. The City of Albany recognizes that we occupy the land originally protected by the Confederated Villages of Lishan. We acknowledge the genocide that took place on these lands and must make strides to repay the moral debt that is owed to this indigenous people, specifically the Ohlone tribe. We thank them for their contributions, which have transformed our community and will continue to bring forth growth and unity. The City of Albany commits to sustaining ongoing relationships with the tribe and together build a better future for all that now make this their home. City Clerk, can you call roll, please?
Member Jordan?
I think I'm here.
Chair Mickey?
Here. We'll move on to item number 2, approval of meeting minutes. Sorry, of action minutes.
I have no corrections. I don't know if there's anybody out in the ether.
And
So
any
would
public
you
comment?
move for,
No public comment?
I will move approval.
I'll second.
Member Jordan?
Yes.
Chair Mickey?
Yes.
Thank you.
Item 3, public comment for persons desiring to address the City Council Standing Committee on an item that is not on the agenda. Please note that each speaker is limited to 3 minutes. The Brown Act limits committee's ability to take and/or discuss items that are not on the agenda. Therefore, such items may be referred to staff for comment or to a future agenda. Any public comment?
We have a member of the public, but I think the comment's already uploaded on
Okay,
with the agenda, so, no.
thank you. So we'll move, we have no item 4 presentation, so we'll move on to item 5, discussion of possible action on matters related to the following items. So proposed biennial budget for fiscal year 2025-26 and fiscal year 26-27.
Good afternoon, committee members. I'm delighted to be here this afternoon as we formally kick off our next biennial budget for fiscal years 25-26 and 26-27. The plan this afternoon is as follows. Review the overall budget process and timeline, provide some context for the budget development, anchor the budget in alignment with the City Council's strategic goals, discuss the proposed budgets for the major operating funds and identifying any significant changes since the last 2-year cycle, provide a very brief overview of the departmental budgets, spend a little time looking ahead at one of a myriad of possibilities of a 10-year forecast, and then talk about next steps for the budget process this year. So with that, Madam Clerk, there, she's got it. She's on top of it. All right. So this is our 2-year budget process. So last year was in December. We were in year 2 of the process, and our department started working on their budgets. Yes, we have been working on this for a long time now. In February, March, we brought a mid-year review, and the council met and put in place their strategic plan for the upcoming 2-year cycle. In May, we are having now our Council Audit and Fiscal Sustainability Standing Committee workshop, and we will have a full City Council workshop or presentation on May 19th. And then we go through budget adoption. Yay, we do a little happy dance. And then we start a year and do a much scaled down version of the budget process for year 2 in order to just make sure that we capture any changes we need to. And then we start the whole process over again. So it feels like 2 years would be a long time, but it comes around very quickly that we enter into the next cycle. So that is where we are. So taking a little bit of a look at what the context is for developing this budget. We have a lot of moving parts. I think that's really one of the biggest pieces, more so than some years, less than others. We do have some global economic trends that are, quite frankly, all over the map and not very clear. So we're just continuing to watch those. We do see a small slowing in consumer confidence and in consumer spending, which affects our sales tax numbers. Property tax is pretty stable. That's one of the great things about property tax, and we are a big property tax city. The downside, of course, is that it moves relatively slowly in terms of growth. But the level of uncertainty around the markets, around the national economy, the local economy, will really continue to challenge us, I think, as we go through this next 2-year cycle. We have experienced the closure of Golden Gate Field, so that too has a dampening effect on our sales tax revenues. So we have seen that. They are softer than they were. And it's up in the air what will happen with that property, and that could create all kinds of changes or maybe no changes. So that's a wait and see. And if land transactions and land development, if my experience tells me anything, is it probably won't happen that quickly. Growing pension liabilities. Last committee meeting, we talked about CalPERS and our pension responsibilities and the costs associated with those, so that continues to play into the budget development. What we also see in the Bay Area in particular is a very strong labor market and rising labor costs. So one, inflation remains higher than historic kind of 2% range. We're still in the 3-ish% range. Tomorrow, the April CPI numbers will come out for the Bay Area. It's the adjustment factor we use for a number of our parcel taxes. The February to February number was at about 2.7%. So it has come down greatly from the last time we used the CPI numbers for the parcel taxes a year ago. But it's still running a little bit higher than it did for a lot of years. And we have a strong labor market, which means we compete with a lot of other entities for good talent. And so I know that this city has been committed to ensuring that our employees are well compensated and that we remain competitive in the market. But this is an expensive market to stay competitive in. And so we do continue to see that in our own labor costs. So moving on, these should look familiar to you as your City Council strategic plan goals for the next 2-year cycle. These were these run through the budget process, and department work not only covers day-to-day operations, but is in support of moving forward on those strategic plan goals. Certainly not everything we do is necessarily pinpointed to a particular strategic plan goal, because a lot of what we do using that iceberg method imagery is kind of below the surface, and it's just day-to-day operations. It just keeps us moving. But these goals do drive kind of our thinking about those higher priority items that get brought forward within resources. Next slide. Dun, da, da, da. Now here's where we do a big congratulations to all of the departments and to the council's leadership. The proposed budget for fiscal year 25-26, for the first time in many years, is balanced. That little zero is such a happy number. Normally zero, not such a happy number. Great number, in my opinion. And it really did take a village to get to that number. So it had both thinking and evaluation on the revenue side. The revenues are essentially right-sized. So for a number of years, particularly coming out of COVID, very conservative in our budgeting of revenues, as with many cities. So we've sort of right-sized those to where we think they're going to land now. And so while it looks like, if you just look at the proposed 26 budget against the FY25 budget, it's like a 14% increase in revenues. That's misleading, though, because we've actually been achieving revenues higher than. So if you take into account against the projected revenues, that projection column is the same column you saw at mid-year when we reviewed the budget for this year. You can see it's still moderate growth, right? We still don't have huge growth in revenues, but we have right-sized the budget to match more closely where we believe that revenues will come in. I will say, probably, sales and use tax still a little soft, as I mentioned. Earnings on investments is the other area that I'm particularly concerned that we may not fare as well as we have in the past several years. We'll just have to wait and see. That's a pretty robust number, and it'll either come about or it won't, but there's really not a lot that we have control on in that realm. But just know that that's an area that we'll be watching in terms of what that's going to produce. We've kind of been all over the map in FY25, although we are starting to see in the most recent quarter some losses that offset some of the gains that we'd had over the past several years. So we'll just have to watch that and hope that the markets stay reasonably strong. On the expenditure side, this is really where the departments took a lot of effort in pretty much putting forward a somewhat like a status quo budget, but a little bit less. Hard work, hard thoughts that kind of went into all of that. If we go to the next slide, I'll talk a little bit more about some of the major changes first on the revenue side. As I said, we've aligned the revenue budgets more closely to align with our actual experience from the last biennial cycle. We feel like we have some handle on what's happening. Recognizing limited growth in sales tax due to softening consumer confidence and persistent inflation a bit higher than we would hope. Property tax revenue growth. Albany did pretty well. The assessor's preliminary estimates for the 25-26 roll showed growth of about 3.7% for Albany. That was a little bit above the average in the county. He did preface the meeting by saying that we should not expect the same for 26-27 and that he would expect it to trend closer to 3%. Again, we're just kind of watching that and making sure that we take that into account and we don't get ahead of ourselves on the revenue side. There are 3 additional sources that are essentially new for this year. One, sewer fund. So in addition to funding all of the sewer fund activities across the city, there are a number of citywide general fund supported functions that support the sewer fund administration, everything in finance, IT, everything. So that calculation has been made, and we are going to make a transfer in from the sewer fund into the general fund in FY26. It actually was in the last biennial budget. In FY24, the transfer didn't get made. In FY25, we are making the transfer, but we're keeping that in the budget, and so it gives us a little boost to help the costs that relate to citywide overhead. Additional Public Works special revenues, so to the extent that Public Works has projects and programs within their operating budget that are eligible for funding by special revenue sources, our Landscape and Lighting District, our Parks and Open Space District, a variety of others. Those sources have been maximized to cover the greatest extent possible the work that is appropriate, while still leaving enough for having adequate funding for capital projects. So it's a balancing act. The Public Works Department does a very good job of managing how those resources are going to flow in terms of what goes into operating versus what goes into capital, but there is a little bit more coming in this year from those special revenues. And then within the police department, there are a couple of changes, but there are net no increase to the general fund. There is, we'll talk on the expenditure side primarily, but there is state COPS funding that will come in to help support an administrative sergeant position. So again, that helps us just manage that funding. Next slide. Very nice. You can see, we ramped up, we sort of flattened out, we're ramping up a little bit again. Pretty tame growth in our revenues from fiscal year 24, 20 and 25 up through 26 and 27. Nothing too dramatic there. Everything except sales tax kind of on a general upswing. Next slide, please. On the expenditure side, so we went through and did labor projections based on the labor agreements and the required increases, which I have a little list of here because it was substantial. And in the 2-year cycle, SEIU employees, so our rank and file employees, are getting a COLA of at least 3% plus equities of 1.5%. Management is somewhat similar. And then both our police and fire unions have significant new contracts that result in 6 to 7%, well, 5 to 6% a year for each of the 2 years. It's split up a little differently between the two bargaining groups. If we had just left it alone and just let those increases all flow into the budget with no other changes, it would have increased our labor costs by about $1.8 million. That's what I did when I first looked at those numbers. However, they're projected to only increase by just under $1 million for 2 reasons primarily. One, there are 3 positions in the budget that are unfunded, will remain unfunded at this point through the budget cycle. And then for all but the very smallest departments, we have budgeted a salary savings figure. And what this does is basically take what we often see, which is turnover leads to salary savings, and we have pulled it into the budget rather than leaving it to happen and coming in under budget. It may seem like, ultimately the math is the same at the end of the year, but it reflects a mindset of closer expenditure management, even on the labor side, than you see without that, and so that's the reason for putting it into the budget. But it helps allow us to get to a balanced budget. And again, it drives decision-making in a way that you don't necessarily get if you just let that occur on the natural. But it essentially is taking advantage of what we know is going to happen anyway. It doesn't require much additional effort. As I mentioned, our expenditures are managed in part by transfers, so we have either moved expenses as appropriate to our EMS fund, so there is a shift from the general fund to the EMS fund, now that that fund is stable and healthy, for appropriate fire department EMS-related expenses, and most of our calls, as you're well aware, are medical, so there is a great deal of the fire department's budget that is, in fact, EMS-related, and as I mentioned, the special funds within the Public Works Department. The one position change in the city that is proposed is to shift the vacant management analyst position from administration to the police department as a communications and records supervisor. This is a position that will allow the police department to have better oversight of communications and records functions by someone who is a specialist in that area and not just a sergeant who is a law enforcement professional who gets plumped into that position. So that's good. And then we have the admin sergeant position that then will be able to be truly an admin sergeant position and can be funded through those COPS funds. So it's a kind of a win-win on that. No net change in the number of authorized full-time positions for the city, just a shift between those two. And then, as we're well aware, our unfunded pension liability costs have gone up by almost $300,000. That's an 8.7% increase in that line item alone. $300,000 is about a little under 1% of our budget, so it's not in and of itself causing an issue, but it certainly is pressure, and it's pressure that we don't have as easy a mechanism to control as with many others. Next slide. Oh, the pretty picture for general fund expenditures. Oh, look, it's very similar. So what you see is a very tightened down FY26, pretty much flat to 25. What you see in FY27 is that those natural increases continue to flow into the budget, but there are no more sort of easy fixes. The 4% salary savings is in, the unfunded positions are already in, and now we're just seeing the costs of those labor increases that not only are significant, but compound over time. It's the beauty of compounding numbers. In this particular case, it's a little harder to take than compounding interest when you're putting money in a bank and you get compound returns back, but it is what it is. So that's the expenditure picture. And then here, this is kind of boring. Salaries, big piece of our budget. Stays a big piece. It's always a big piece, somewhere between 70 and 75%. That is not uncommon for municipalities, and so you'll see that that is just always the situation. It does give you a clear picture that if additional reductions are required, whether it's for FY27 or whether it's farther out into the future, it's really hard to make enough cuts in non-labor costs to make a difference when 70+% of your budget is labor. There's not enough, to quote something local to here, there's not enough there to make much of a difference outside of the labor costs, and that's unfortunately a challenge that I think faces all local governments. So, next slide, please. This is not intended for you to try to take it all in at once. Like, I'm going to go over every line. Okay, you ready? I'm going to read. No, I'm not going to read. It's really just to give you this picture. It's also in your packet in your budget in brief, or as we were fondly calling it in the office, the baby budget, because it's a streamlined version thereof. And really it shows that for most departments it's pretty flat. There is a little bit of growth here and there depending on the specifics in the department. And then if we go to the next slide, you can see fire has a pretty distinct drop, and that's because we have moved costs to the EMS fund where it's appropriate, and then you can see the EMS fund, we've aligned that budget better based on experience. I think there was some learning after Measure K was approved as to how much that would bring in really and how to manage that. Additionally, there is a significant component of revenue in that EMS fund that comes from ambulance billing, and that has done quite well over the last several years. We do have a third-party biller. I don't know how long that's been in place, but it's really proving to be quite valuable. And so we do see good numbers coming out of those ambulance billings. And then in addition to that, the other major operating fund is our enterprise fund, which is sewer, fully supported by sewer fees. No general fund contribution to that. In fact, the contribution goes the other way. A few things about the sewer fees. They currently bring in a fair amount more than our day-to-day operating costs, but that's because we have significant capital costs. And so all the revenue comes in from that one source. We spend about a third of it, maybe a little bit more, on operations. The rest is in reserve for capital, and we have, I believe, at the council meeting on the 5th, the Brighton Sewer project was raised, and that's a major project that's coming forward, and there's a little bit more beyond that will tap into that. We are also in the process of working with the Public Works Department on supporting them in a fee study so that we can continue to look at whether our sewer fees are appropriately calculated to cover what they need to cover. And the sewer fees have not gone up in the last biennial cycle because we're waiting on the outcome of the fee study. So you still see no proposed sewer fee increase when we get to that point in the process. in just a couple of weeks. Next slide, please. All right. I'm just going to briefly go over this, and then obviously questions can abound. So one of the things that was begun in the last cycle was a look ahead. Like, how do we start to take stock of what could happen in our longer future? So we're not just looking, not even just 1 year or 2 years, but we're looking out. Now, I will say, very much a crystal ball thing. So after 3, 4, 5 years, you really don't have a good sense, but you can see trends, and you can see kind of what might impact those trends. So the assumptions in the version that is in your packet: average growth in revenues and expenditures, some specifics on individual categories versus overall categories, and so just really trying to make sure that we don't kind of overplay any one particular revenue or expenditure category, but that we have a very good picture of it. And then the unfunded liability, pension liability payments, CalPERS goes out and gives us the anticipated UAL payments for several years, but we also have an actuarial company. They used to be called GovInvest, which may be what you remember. They're now called TrueComp. And they do additional actuarial work for us that helps us kind of wrap our arms around what that is going to look like. So here's the picture. That little teeny tiny blue bar, yeah. I think at the time I did this, we were at like $30,000 or something. It's probably why it actually sticks up, because you can, I mean, you run it a million times, you get slightly different answers. However, but then you can see right away, we go right back to those, and I didn't want to use red. I was like, I'm not putting red bars. I'm using something slightly more cheerful than red bars. And that is primarily the function of revenue growth not keeping pace with expenditure growth, and particularly the UAL payment. It's just enough that it bounces the expenditures, and so it's about a $1.2 million deficit that is showing now for FY27, and that we will be asking the council to adopt as part of the budget, with the explicit acknowledgement that if that were to all play out exactly as it's shown in the budget document, which it won't, but if it were, that is a planned use of the reserve. So it isn't without potential consequence if it comes to pass. However, we will know an awful lot more in 10 or 11 months when we're preparing for the 26-27. And while it won't be a full budget cycle, I think we can make more informed recommendations to the council about how to balance 26-27 than we can today, and to spend a lot of painful effort today to try to get that to zero when it's a year plus, I mean, it's a year away. We have all this economic uncertainty. The cost-benefit ratio is just not there. It's not worth the effort to force that issue today, but know that it's kind of just put a pin in it, because we will come back to it for 26-27. And what do I have? Oh, ta-da! 25-26 is balanced. 26-27 has a relatively smaller deficit, but will need to be addressed before that budget is implemented in July 1, 2026. Expenditures, labor, pension liability, et cetera, all the things that we talked about already. And with that, I just want to briefly touch on one more thing before I turn it over. So next steps, there are 2 council meetings that will have budget items. May 19th will be a presentation for feedback, and then June 2nd will be an adoption hearing, which is a public hearing. May 19th, some items that were not in the budget in brief today. We'll have more information on staffing, not that there are any changes, but you will have all of that. There was also recent legislation that requires us to do some analysis around vacancies and recruitment and retention efforts, so we'll have that data for the council. We will have additional information on the 19th on all of our special revenue sources. There are a lot of them, but we'll have all of those budgets proposed. Each of the departments will have detail on accomplishments and looking back, goals looking forward, as well as their departmental budgets, and information on some of our capital reserves. On June 2nd, in addition to all of that, I feel like it's like I'm trying to sell you, like you can have the basic version, you could have the business version, you could have the pro version. In addition to all of the things you get on the 19th, you also get the master fee schedule, the investment policy, the appropriations limit, and all your pension tax rate recommendations, which will need to be adopted in order to get our partial tax rates put on the rolls for property tax for 25-26. So that's kind of the next two big steps. And with that, all budget all the time. Happy to answer any questions.
I will go. I see this.
I'm letting you take the pole position.
There we go.
as Normal. It was a little strange last meeting when you weren't in the pole position.
Yeah. Well, first, thank you all. Zero. I'm ecstatic about that, of course. And for taking into account turnover, that was one of the things I struggled with when I came on the council, was that turnover was not taken into account. And so I felt like I had to kind of do my own forecasting, because we were being told we were going to be in deficit, but that wasn't taken into account. So I'm very excited that's taken into account now, so I can not do that work anymore. Thank you. I thought I remembered last year's actuals were in deficit according to the audit, but they show as being, I don't know, maybe you could put up the summary table. It was like $300,000 in surplus.
So part of that is the difference between tying to the audit and not tying to the audit. And one of the things that is always in the audit numbers that is not in what I think of as kind of the cash numbers.
Mm-hmm.
And that is, we are required to report on unrealized gains and losses. So in our audit numbers, unrealized gains, paper gains,
Mhm.
that we haven't taken advantage of, are shown. And
Oh.
so that sways that number, and these tie to our audit. And so they are higher, it's a better outcome. Oh, hello. It's a better outcome here that you see because it ties to the audit, and the audit has those unrealized gains. It's one of the big frustrations because it's hard to explain every single time, but we essentially ended flat last year.
Okay. Yeah. Great. Thought it was worse than that because I sort of remembered it being like $1 million, which I attributed to the easement situation. So thank you. The projected expenses for this fiscal year, I checked them against this fiscal year. I checked them against the budget because that's what we're comparing to. And it looks like they're, they say projected, but I think they're what's shown in the current budget. Is that my understanding?
They should be what showed to you at mid-year, which was a projection. It was not budget.
Okay.
Because I can tell you that administration is higher than budget
Okay.
for the million net that we had as part of the settlement.
Yeah, okay. Okay.
That's
I only
how I always know that those are the projected numbers, because the administration numbers went
yeah,
crazy.
okay. I only compared a few numbers and those were the same. But
Police was the same.
okay.
So if you looked at police, I believe that the projection at mid-year was that police would come in essentially on budget, so I just left it alone. Public Works is a lower number. CD might be at budget. So there were a couple that were very close to budget, but administration was definitely over.
Okay.
And that is reflected here.
And with a few more months of data, and you may not have an answer because you've been building this budget, but if you do you have any feel for how that projection is looking for this year?
So I have started to look, just out of pure curiosity, in the middle of needing a break from this, and it's just like, let me go rerun numbers for Q3 for this year. It hasn't really changed a whole lot because expenses keep sort of galloping along at the same rate, and revenues are not necessarily getting any stronger per se. So the last time I ran it, I think it's similar. It might be a little bit better than that. So it was like 1.219742, for example. And I'm hoping it'll be under $1 million. Might even be better than that, but I haven't seen anything in that third quarter that immediately says to me, oh yeah, we're going to be closer to zero. So I'm hoping, I don't expect it to get worse, but I don't know how much better I expect it to be. But I have looked at it.
Okay, thanks, appreciate that.
Because I'm a nerd.
I resemble that remark. Let's see. Budget in brief, so that the prose part of what we were provided cites the CalPERS issuance of the UAL in 2023, June 30th, 2023, I believe. How often do they issue a new UAL for Albany?
So every August, essentially, we get a new statement which gives us the contribution required for the following fiscal year. It is based on a years ago data.
Oh, I see.
So the August 2024 was, I believe, the June 23 actuarial.
Okay, I get it, right, I forget about that lag.
Right.
Yeah.
There's
Okay,
a significant lag, and if you're trying to figure out when investment results come in, it's a 2-year lag.
okay.
So actuarial is, what's in here is the most recent. We will get our next update once a year,
Yeah.
but we'll get it in August.
Right, okay. Let's see, so under taxes, item 1C, again, this is in the pros, lists possessory interest property taxes. I don't think we're getting much of that, if any, at this time because of the way our property tax measures are structured.
We're getting it for the base.
The base, okay, thank you. And then account 1201, which is the measure BB local streets and roads pass-through funding from Alameda County Transportation Commission. That shows that the balance is basically just building, that there's not an expenditure, I guess. I don't know if that's because we're letting that fund build up to pay for something more dramatic at some point.
Yes, I believe so. I believe that that's accumulating for purposes of a capital project. And so with the adoption of the new CIP, you'll start to see those pieces come in. And there are a couple of the funds where that is the case. I think Measure M also has a similar situation.
Okay, great, thanks. Let's see, in FY27, the reauthorized property tax for sidewalk repair and now path repair will kick in. So even though it was passed.
No, it'll kick in now. 26.
What was it? Oh yeah, I guess it'll kick in right in the first year of this budget. So that included funds that would be a transfer in, if I understand transfers in. It sounds like you've accounted for that. Okay, thank you.
Thank your Public Works Department, they were
Okay.
on it.
Yeah.
Yes, they were like, oh yes, and here's your $88,000 or whatever it is that's
Yeah.
on the staff side, in addition to the additional project, concrete kind of work.
Yeah, great, okay. 'Cause I campaigned for that, so I'm like, small amount, but I'm,
Oh, let me tell you, scrub. I
that's
go
right.
looking for all sorts of money, so yes, they.
the carpet under the rug, scrub.
Yeah, it's, those seat cushions, like, where's my bake sale money?
And then I saw that the risk management position is, I don't know what proper to characterize it, but that title is ending and another title is beginning.
Yes.
So I didn't know if maybe some more details on that, like risk management. Is it done? Risk management's never done, so.
No, risk management is definitely not done, and I can speak to it a little bit, and then city manager can certainly add. So the staff position that was associated with risk management has been vacant for a little while now, and that's the position that'll be reallocated to police. The work that is associated with that is essentially dispersed amongst other staff in the city. So Isabel, our assistant city manager, is the point person on that. She and I have been working on the insurance rates to try to help manage those costs. We did actually make a change in our self-insured retention or deductible for our two big programs, general liability and workers' comp, which allows us to have slightly, it's just like raising the deductible on your own insurance, right? Your premiums go down, something bad happens, you bear a bigger share. But we looked at the data, well, our joint risk pool pulled the data for us to look at what our claims have been over the last 5 to 10 years. And there have only been a handful of times we've ever gone over between what was our limit and what is our limit now. And so the likelihood of us having net higher costs is low. And so we took the opportunity to try to reduce our premiums. Since insurance premiums went up anyway, they went up by less than they would have for us, but by less than they would have for us. So that's helped us manage those. But those duties have generally been dispersed amongst other folks who kind of pick up pieces of it, whether it's the workers' comp side or looking at premiums, et cetera. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
No, I think that great summary. It really is administered across departments as well as the leadership and several levels through our third-party provider.
Great, well, thank you to everybody, and thank you to yourself and assistant city manager for looking at the insurance policy as it were. And I think a credit to the culture of the city, that finding that there aren't, a lot of claims in that band there. So that's pretty remarkable. That's noteworthy. What questions on the department by department detail? Let's see. I think there's about a 400,000, I'm rounding, increase in professional and consulting services, I think it was, which is about 40%. I don't know if
Across.
this is in administration.
In administration.
In administration.
I did not bring the
Yeah, that's
one piece. We can provide any additional detail
Sure.
on that. I'm trying to remember what drove that. That might be in part a right sizing.
yeah, I see it's the same as 23, 24 actuals.
Yeah, there were a number of
some of those,
cases
yeah,
where,
okay.
in administration in particular, both on the labor side and on the services and supplies, there were budget numbers that just hadn't been adjusted. And so you could see the budget was here and the actuals, and it was like, let's put the budget where the actuals are.
Yeah, okay.
So that's typically what that
Okay.
is, and
Yeah.
nothing else stands out. That is where the SSB expenditures are, but they're capped at the 226 essentially at this
Right.
point, which is our estimate of the revenues.
Right. So I've got other questions now that I'm realizing that I'm going to check as I go which ones are that situation and not ask those. bear with me a moment. Okay, so police revenues went up, budgeted to go up by $200,000 or 60%. I don't know where police revenues come from. I'm ignorant in that regard, so.
There are two pieces to that. One is a small increase in parking enforcement revenue as a result of being able to fill those part-time parking enforcement positions. So the police department has 2 people, I think, on, and is bringing on a third. Anyway,
Yeah.
more than they've had. The second piece is that transferring of the COPS funds
Okay, great, thank
at
you.
$184,000. That's the bulk of that.
Great. And then Public Works, are transfers in the revenues number?
Yes.
Okay,
Sorry.
that's okay, that's okay.
They are. I was like, where are those budgeted?
Yeah,
Yes, they're in
yeah.
a revenue object code.
Yeah, okay. And then, well, this is a longer conversation, but I brought it up before, so I'll do it and bring that up in deliberation. You mentioned that a staffing analysis is required by state law and maybe some other things. So is the state paying us to do that analysis? They're not supposed to?
Oh, well, it's just like everything else. They say, oh, well, it's not really a state mandated program. And we say, oh, yes, it is. And we file claims, or we, submit with other agencies who file claims. And I don't know that any local government has gotten a state mandated claim reimbursement in a really long time.
So is this something that, like, pulled and submitted to that state commission on mandates? What is the state
Yeah, I
commission on unfunded mandates or something, which is like?
Commission on State Mandates, COSM.
I don't think this one really raises to that level as
okay.
contentious as the permitting obligations were with stormwater, which were
Yeah.
significantly.
Or SB 383, my favorite.
Yes.
The new website,
.gov.
ca.gov, agencies all over the state are participating in a claim to the state because it requires reprogramming lots of things.
Yeah.
For example, things that I don't know if the state thought about, but all of our like login information for our financial system is all based on our email addresses. So when our email addresses change, every single one of those authentications has to, like, we have to get that updated on the financial system side as well as on, I know, it's just a big, yes, it's a lot of time. I'll just, put a point at the end of
Yeah.
that. But yeah, the AB 2561 is the legislation that passed that requires additional information on staffing. It's not that much more unless a jurisdiction has more than 20% vacancy in any single bargaining unit, which we do not.
Okay.
If that occurs, there is quite a bit more effort that's required. There are just some key things that we have to report regardless of what the vacancy rates are. But since we don't have the higher vacancy rate, it does help us. We don't have the extraordinary reporting. It's just one more little thing that nickel and dimes us to.
Yeah. Well, given that we don't have any units with that vacancy rate, that's another opportunity to credit staff and HR for managing
Yes.
that. And I'll say once again, what I realized a year ago is that Albany has the smallest budget, but the third smallest by population, therefore making it probably the most efficient city in the county. So my thanks for that.
Nicole.
Yeah. Let's see. Oh, you mentioned the investment policy is coming to the council on the 2nd of June. Is that a general matter, or is that going to be ESG?
General,
okay.
because the the council has delegated investment authority to the city treasurer. Now that it's a staff position rather than an elected position, we are required to have the council review and adopt the investment policy every year and redelegate that authority. We also have our advisors review that every year for changes in legislation, et cetera. There are no proposed changes. It just has to come and get adopted again so that that authority can be delegated. So it isn't planned to take on that issue of potential ESG changes, we need to have it adopted, and then we can continue to have that conversation.
Great, thank you. Those are my questions.
You. So a lot of my questions have been answered already. Wanted to just better understand, elaborate on the changes and how you estimated revenues and costs, right sizing and salary turnover. Perfect. Got information on 2026, 27. Risk manager, thank you for raising that question, because that was my question. I was like, wait, we're moving risk manager to the police department, but who's doing the risk management? Okay, good to know that staff has already dispersed that. So 2 questions. One is just in going through the table of all your numbers, under administration, other expenses, I don't think this is the one Preston brought up. There's $1 million drop this year, but you look at every year and it's like 1.9 million, 700,000. Like it jumped everywhere, but I'm a little confused how we suddenly dropped to 291,000 instead of the other large numbers. So I don't know if that's
The biggest change between 25 and 26 is that we don't have a settlement, and so we don't need to budget for it. So that's $1 million, right? So that, I mean, it varies some year to year, kind of regardless of what's going on, but we have no extraordinary expenses, and that one particular expense goes away, which makes it look completely crazy up in 25 and crazy down in 26. I'll take the down.
perfect. Let's see. The only other question I had was, as Councilmember Jordan mentioned, many thanks to staff, many thanks to you, Rena, for really all the effort you've done, putting in front of us a budget that's more closely aligned with expected revenue and expenses, which means we can say that we are likely to be even this coming year. But in that effort of each kind of department going through line item where money could be saved, removing staff positions essentially, one of the things that has been a hot button item in the community is the community events. And so thankful that staff was able to figure a way to bring back Dinner with Albany this year. That'll be happening. Are we still anticipating having budget for those community events?
I don't believe there's any proposed reduction in 26 or 27 in those community events. No. So those are essentially in there at status quo. More of the changes in recreation and community services were more aligning fee revenue and costs with class instructors and those kinds of costs as opposed to events.
Great. Because I know I'll be getting that question. Will we have Dinner with Albany? That's it for my questions.
Building off that question, so for some number of years, I lost track of how many, can't bring it to mind, city's sponsorship / contribution to Stroll and Strollish, Solano, Stroll and Strollish, has been from ARPA funding. That will be ending one way or another during this budget cycle. I am presuming that amount is not included in the budget for that. But I don't know. Is there an amount included in the general fund budget for that?
There is, yeah, it's primarily in the council discretionary account, which I think is in at 35,000. I think it went in at 35 instead of 20 or 25 for 26 and 27. So certainly, ARPA funding all has to be spent by December 2026. So we know that there's no ARPA funding after that. But there is a limited amount in there for support for entities outside of what has been ARPA funding for the last several years.
At the council's discretion. At discretionary.
At the council's
Okay,
discretionary.
thank you.
Thank you. Not seeing any more council questions. We'll open up for public comment.
Yes, Gregory Bone, retiring from the police department. I think I missed an exchange between Councilmember Jordan and our finance director when her microphone was turned off. I have a question. Maybe if I'm right on the exchange, and I'm not sure I am, it could be explained by the finance director again. I think Councilmember Jordan may have asked about an actual budget surplus for 23-24 of $299,785. I'm always trying to understand the budgets, and quite frankly, it's a challenge for me. But I looked at the 2024 ACFR on page 41, and for the 23-24, I think it was actually showing a deficit of $296,199. If that's what your exchange was about, and I couldn't hear your answer again, I wondered if you wouldn't mind just giving a brief explanation to reconcile those two numbers, or if I've got it completely wrong, just forget about this question. Secondly, I really appreciate the work coming out of the finance department. I think it's just been excellent. As I said, I missed last April's meeting on the pensions. I'm sorry about that, but just a fantastic explanation, really well done. And tonight, of course, extremely thorough. So thank you. And that is my question, if you can take it. Thank you.
Thank you for your comments. Okay. Reno, did you follow the question? Okay.
She might actually.
I'm pulling up the
ACFR.
ACFR,
Yeah.
the lovely acronym. With the switch over to the new website, the 2024 ACFR is not posted, although it was, I can get to it another way. I just have to be slightly creative. This is what I want to do. Sorry for the
We'll build
small
we'll build
delay.
15-minute increments to the state for forcing us to switch to
Yeah.
Gov or to Gov.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Now all I have to do is remember which council meeting it went to.
Yeah, that's what I do. Somebody told me they did a search and item in the agendas came up. It's never happened with the old search function, so that was pretty,
It should, but
it's pretty exciting. I'm not saying it would for you, just that somebody reported that it happened once for something was revelatory.
fine. Here we go, February committee meeting. Fewer of those. Oh, look, ACFR. Okay.
And to former police chief Bone, that was essentially my question. Something similar like that, close enough that we'll be further edified by the answer.
You will be momentarily, as soon as I can. Yes, we've been struggling to get, make sure we can get all of our documents up, and so I apologize that that one is not quite yet at the governmental activities, general fund. Here we go. Net change in fund balance is a positive 296,199, which is very close. For some reason, it's $3,000 off, but it is the same direction.
But it is positive.
It is. It's,
interesting.
So the change in fund balance shown in the ACFR is $296,199, with so a small addition to fund balance. And this would also show a small addition to fund balance. So it is essentially the same as that. And what you might have seen in the Q4 presentation of the FY24 budget before the ACFR was completed would have been a number that was different by at least the unrealized gains piece that I always take out on the budget side because it's not real. This doesn't, from my perspective, it doesn't tell you anything about what you could or could not spend because you can't spend it because it's not real. But from an accounting standpoint, it's real. So that is, the numbers are essentially the same, and it's slightly different than what you'd get on a cash basis because it includes that unrealized gains.
So I posit that you essentially have to kind of reverse engineer in the unrealized gains to get the number to match, or doing actuals, or where do you put unrealized gains in the budget?
They just don't exist. We treat them as if they were zero because they're zero from a cash perspective.
Like, so maybe not, budget might be the wrong word, in the projected that you had for last year. So if you have to,
They zero.
okay. So then how do you match if the ACFR, that number from the ACFR takes into account unrealized gains, then how do you match the projected that we have in this table to that?
So the FY23-24 is actuals. It's
Yeah.
built off the ACFR.
Okay. Okay.
It's built to tie, although I'm a little perturbed by $3,000 being off, but
Yeah.
I can live with that. It's built off the ACFR for exactly this reason, because the goal was that if you look at this and you looked at the ACFR,
Right.
you should see the same thing.
Yeah.
Even though from a budgetary standpoint, you don't see it kind of while it's playing out because it's not real money.
Okay. And I think, like the former police chief, I think I read that number as negative in the ACFR as well, or is it as a deficit? Maybe it has to do with like a double negative or something, you know? Sometimes I get lost with the parentheses. Like, is this table an expense or revenue? And, you know, which way is the negative? And so maybe that was part of what went on.
We've had a lot of conversations about, do you do revenue minus expense or expense minus revenue, and what's a negative number? So I completely understand that because we wrap our minds around that over and over again. But the thing I can tell you that's in the ACFR is that the beginning of the year balance was 11.379, and the end of the year balance is 11.675.
Right. So that's definitive.
That is an increase in fund balance, regardless of which way you do the math.
So look at the balance.
Yeah,
That's, I think, the
exactly.
clue
It was
for
like, let me make sure,
novice.
okay, it's a bigger number, check.
All right.
And you'd think it would be simpler than that, but it's not.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
So we kind of answered the question, jumped in discussion. We can continue discussion. Any other items?
Yeah, so on the UAL and annual UAL payment chart, I'm still haven't drilled into my mind which is base year and which is current year, which one is in which units. So I was thinking, oh yeah, well, the answer in science is put the units on the chart. So I don't know if, like, after the vertical axis label, it could say,
Sure.
you know, base year, current year, and then maybe have a definition of each for people like me that don't know what they mean, or didn't know what they mean. And then I relayed a bit ago by email, and I know it's still a work in progress, understandably, but I thought it would be useful for everyone to have some understanding if the budget kept paying year, what we're paying in the coming year, how much of the UAL is not covered by that? Because I hear people say, oh, we have this 41, 42, 528, you know, this huge $1 million UAL. And I'm like, yeah, but our budget is currently bearing some portion of that if we just kept paying what we're paying. Because the sense is like, oh, this is something we're not paying for any of it, and it's this meteor that's coming at us. So just to be able to break those two apart.
And I did look at that after our committee meeting, but I don't remember where I
That's fine.
wrote it down, so I
Sure.
can't call it to mind,
Yeah.
but yes.
Yeah, I'm just saying for when it comes to council, if possible, and I know there's a lot going on, so it's a nice to have, not a have to have, but I think it would help everybody understand the pain level. That it's not as high as it sounds like, but, you know, it is there. Let's see. Looking at the second year budget deficit brings me back to mind to the importance potentially of having measures on the 2026 primary ballot. Now, most of these, you know, I've been focused on the property tax measures that don't have the unsecured property is currently in bounds for the most part, but those aren't necessarily going to help the general fund. Those aren't going to help the, right. I mean, I want to get that corrected for its own purpose. The one that could help the deficit is restructuring the business license taxes. And my understanding from 2024 was that if that measure was on the ballot in the general election, it would really be too late to implement by January, which is when it's collected. And so for that purpose, if that concept is to have a possibility of helping with 2020, with the second year budget deficit, it needs to be on the primary ballot in 2026. So.
And as a general local tax, it can be on, there are some things that can't go on a primary ballot, but that should be able to go on a primary ballot. There is additional cost of putting something on a primary that the clerk may be able to speak to, and it's shockingly expensive. So that is something that, as we start to look at that business license tax revenue potential, that we also look at the difference in cost between putting it on the primary versus putting it on the general.
Yeah, I can offer that because we can package it. So the registrar's office does charge is they basically charge a single cost, whether you have one measure or 5 measures on the ballot. It doesn't scale. For the most part, except for like,
Sorry, I didn't hear the question.
I said for the most part, what the registrar charges doesn't scale with the number of ballot measures. So they have pretty much a charge for registered voter. I mean, there are some printing charges that scale, but there's a lot that doesn't.
I don't know, we just received the last invoice, and they actually separate out the measure.
Oh, they did?
A separate invoice this year.
Fascinating. That's the first time. 'Cause, I
So,
mean, yeah, as you know, I've looked
yeah,
at all the
I'm
invoices
still
and they
trying
never did that
to,
before, so.
I
Okay.
sent an email to find out more why, or what caused the separate invoice.
Yeah,
So I'm still
interesting.
waiting to hear back.
Okay. Yeah, so that was, last election was the first time they've done that, and I've looked at invoices for the past 10 years, and it's just been same item, same amount per registered voter for every city, every jurisdiction, without regard to how much or how little they had on the ballot. So, yeah, that may change things quite a bit, because I had in mind that the unsecured property taxes, we're gonna lose another year of those if we don't put them on the primary ballot. So every year we don't have it in place, we're losing another year of that special tax revenue. And if we have it on the primary ballot, my understanding is the results will be certified in time to have the tax collector included on the property tax ballot for that fiscal year. Whereas if we wait till November, then we're not going to get it, you know, we're going to miss that year. And it's about $500,000 that we're leaving on the table by my estimation, so it's not insubstantial. But if they're charging per measure now, that could change the equation.
I don't know if they would note that it's by measure, but
Right.
definitely the typesetting, the proofreading, the printing, because, you know, if you have more ballot measure, there's definitely more pages.
Right, sure.
And there's more things to translate, to proofread, to set the layout and stuff like
Right,
that. So
right.
that will, you know, regardless of whether it's a separate invoice or not, that will be an increase.
Right. Well, yeah, no reason to belabor it further. We'll just have to look and see what makes sense. But I keep putting this out there because that time is going to go faster and faster towards that election. And if we're going to do it, then back up from when we vote for measures for November elections, it's in July, which is 4 months ahead. So if we're going to do it for June, then we're talking like January. That's not actually that far away. So
It also necessitates the facilitation of the analysis through our new third-party provider. So we'll need to check that timeline as well with HDL in terms of putting a product before the council to consider.
Yep. Yep. Let's see if I had anything else here. Just want to note that the budget doesn't include the need for being able to fund reserves for capital replacement. Is that, I certainly try to ignore that, but I try not to ignore it as well. So that is something that's not on the books and not recognized, but is real as things deteriorate. And then the current budget includes, I think, $5,000 a year to pay the CERT trainers. And I don't know if that is continued in this budget or not. It is.
Yes, that's
Okay.
continued forward.
Okay, thank you. That's what I have. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Jordan. I think my maybe closing comment would be just that I'm really excited about the right sizing of estimates, given that that is a way moving forward in which we expect our projections to be closer to what we expect to happen. Excited about the salary savings, even though that's a very much a one-time thing. We can only really do that once. No, that one we can do. We can't do the removing 3 positions in the future. And I take to heart your warning to not get too worried about 2026, 27, because there's a lot that can happen in between now and then. Either make it better or make things harder on us. But I think to me, that makes it even more important, the efforts that you all put into getting us something that is more realistic to what we've seen as the trends in the past. Because had you not done that, we would be looking at a big deficit likely this year. And we'd look at something that would look outrageous in 2026, 27, and that would make it very hard for me to take your advice not worrying about it yet. So I end by just saying I really appreciate the effort that you all have put into making this a budget that is easier for all of us to understand, but also is closer to what history has shown us. Because I have heard we have projected deficits, but we never realize the deficit. I'm like, yeah, but what if, right? And so knowing that we are more closely aligned, yes, we could still have a deficit in 25, 26, but at least now it's more, I feel like it's more grounded. Our budget estimates are more grounded. And so I'm more comfortable in my conversations with people, and I feel more comfortable about where we stand today and the efforts we still have to make 26 and 27 better, and frankly, deal with UAL over the long term. But thank you. This is where I would end this.
Yeah, I guess on the UAL, and again, something I share by email and understandable with everything you've been doing, but just to put it in the public domain, at the last meeting when we considered the UAL, we discussed financing it, and I said, well, yeah, it probably doesn't make sense because of the interest rates, but I actually followed up afterwards, and there is an interest rate spread. Again, just searching and getting general information. I know there's a lot of specifics, so that may not be accurate, but for jurisdictions with Albany's credit rating, it was like 4.8% for bonding. And so when I ran numbers, and again, a lot of considerations, but as a starting point, it looked like it would actually save us money, finance it. It would both give us more certainty on what we needed to pay year by year. It would lower, spread out our payments so they don't have such a peak, and lower our payments, how much we're paying overall. So I have asked staff to look into that at such time as there is capacity, and just an idea. We'll see what happens.
The one thing I would specifically add, so as people are thinking about that, that borrowing is typically done at taxable rates, not tax exempt rates. And so there's a smaller spread, like right off the top from what you were comparing, plus the one-time costs of issuance that have to be spread out, blah, blah, blah. So there are many things to consider, but just to know that if you're trying to really just use general estimates, you have to look at taxable rates, not at tax exempt rates, because of the type of borrowing it is.
Yeah, so I take that at face value, but I can't help but be curious and ask why. Why is it taxable rates? It's not a capital project or something, or?
This is way beyond
Way
my level of
arcane.
expertise. We have just hit the wall on what I can speak.
You found the wall.
We did. Yeah, ooh, what makes that a
Not easy.
tax? I just know it all. No, yeah, I don't remember why they
Yeah,
have
that's
to be
fine.
taxable as opposed
Fine.
to tax exempt, but they do.
Scientific
so-
brain, I can't help but ask. Thanks. Although that's painful to learn, but as I said, there's probably all sorts of factors, and there you go. There's a huge one.
With that, we'll move on to item 6, announcements. Any announcements? I have no announcements. I will just remind the public that this conversation will continue on May 19th and June 2nd. And let's see, with that, I'll adjourn today's meeting. Thank you, everyone.